Chicago in the autumn of 1871 was a city on the brink. It was a place waiting to burn, though it did not know it yet. The summer had been brutally dry. Since July, barely 2 inches of rain had fallen, leaving the entire city parched and brittle. Chicago was a city of wood. From the sidewalks to the streets and the towering grain elevators, everything was dry as kindling. The tenements and warehouses were packed tight. Every structure was a potential fuel source, waiting for a single spark to ignite. On the night of October 8, 1871, that spark finally found its mark in a barn on DeKoven Street. What happened next would consume everything. The fire began to move north, pushed by a relentless and powerful southwest wind. It jumped from building to building with terrifying speed. The fire department was already exhausted from fighting a blaze the night before. Their equipment was worn down and their horses were spent. They were ill-prepared for the inferno that was now growing. The wind continued to pick up, turning the small barn fire into a massive, uncontrollable wall of heat and destruction. Within hours, the fire reached the Chicago River. This was the city's natural fire break, the barrier that was supposed to save them. But the wind was too strong. It carried burning embers high into the air, launching them across the water to the other side. The embers landed on rooftops that were already bone dry. The river could not stop the fire. It barely even slowed it down. The courthouse bell began to ring, signaling a desperate alarm. The city woke up to a sky glowing a deep, ominous orange. The courthouse itself soon caught fire. The bell continued to ring, a haunting sound echoing through the smoke-filled streets. The tower eventually collapsed under the heat. The bell fell silent, and the alarm that was meant to save Chicago became its eulogy. Panic took hold. Tens of thousands of people flooded into the streets, desperate to escape the encroaching wall of flame. They carried whatever they could hold: children, furniture, money, and precious family photographs. Anything to save a piece of their lives. They fled north along the lakefront, but the fire moved faster than the crowds could run. Some sought refuge in the shallow waters of Lake Michigan, standing chest deep in the cold water to escape the blistering heat. They watched from the water's edge as their city was swallowed by the flames, a sight they would never forget. Others ran until they reached the open prairie beyond the city limits, collapsing in the grass, exhausted and terrified. They looked back to see the sky turn the color of blood, reflecting the destruction of the world they once knew. The fire burned for 2 long days. The city was trapped in a cycle of heat, smoke, and total devastation. Finally, on the night of October 10th, the rain began to fall, the same rain that had refused to come all summer. By the time the clouds broke, Chicago was reduced to nothing but ash and smoldering ruins. The scale of the disaster was staggering. More than 17,000 buildings had been completely destroyed by the flames. 73 miles of streets were gone. Nearly 100,000 people, a full third of the city, were left homeless overnight. The financial district was leveled. The elegant hotels that once lined the lakefront were now just piles of charred timber. The new stone buildings that Chicagoans had been so proud of were gone, crumbled into unrecognizable heaps. The death toll was estimated between 200 and 300 people. It was remarkably low, but only because the fire moved so quickly. People had just enough time to run for their lives. Luck played a larger role in survival than any organized plan. But in the aftermath, the city needed a culprit. Newspapers across the country quickly settled on a convenient story. They pointed to a woman named Catherine O'Leary and her cow, claiming a kick lantern had started the whole disaster. It was a perfect narrative. Simple, vivid, and easy to print for a public hungry for someone to blame. It was also almost certainly not true. The story was a fabrication, a convenient lie to explain away a complex tragedy. Catherine O'Leary was investigated and eventually cleared of all wrongdoing by the official inquiry. Multiple witnesses confirmed she was asleep in her bed when the fire first broke out in the barn. Decades later, a reporter named Michael Ahern admitted he had invented the cow story to sell more newspapers. But by then, the damage was already done. Catherine O'Leary spent the rest of her life in deep, quiet shame. She refused to speak publicly, humiliated by a story that never actually happened, carrying the blame until her death in 1895. What actually started the fire in that barn on DeKoven Street remains an official mystery to this day. What we do know is that the fire was not the fault of a cow or a single person. It was a failure of urban planning. Chicago had built a world-class city almost entirely out of wood. They ignored the risks of dry summers and strong winds, operating with inadequate water pressure and an overwhelmed fire department. The city had simply assumed it would never burn, blinded by its own rapid growth and unchecked ambition. It was the city's own drive to expand that ultimately led to its destruction. By the morning of October 11, 1871, Chicago was the largest disaster scene in American history. 100,000 people wandered the ruins with nowhere to go, their lives scattered in the dust. The downtown area was reduced to a landscape of lonely chimneys and scorched stone foundations. For weeks, the smell of smoke hung heavy over the lake, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Yet, in the middle of all that ash, on Michigan Avenue, one structure stood defiant. The Chicago Water Tower remained untouched. It stood alone, the only stone structure left on the entire north side. It serves as a symbol of resilience, a silent witness to the night the city burned to the ground. It still stands today, a landmark in a city that was rebuilt from the ashes of its own history. But the story does not end with the fire. Episode 10 will show you what happened next. Chicago did something that nobody expected. It did something that shocked the entire world. It got back up, it rebuilt, it recovered, and it redefined itself in the face of absolute ruin. This has been the Chicago Cipher. We are uncovering the stories that most people never get to hear. We are telling Chicago's story, one episode at a time, revealing the truth behind the legends. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what comes next in this journey through history.